Forging a signature is a decision that was not made in one moment. It was built slowly, like a crack running through glass. I'm William. I'm 38 now, and there are things I've done that still come back to me at strange hours, usually when the house is quiet and there's nothing to drown out memory. This happened when I was 26. Back then, I wasn't some career criminal. I had a cheap apartment, a second-hand car that stalled at traffic lights, and a job in the back office of a small shipping company where nobody noticed me unless something went wrong. My father had died 2 years earlier, my mother was sick, and I was behind on almost everything: rent, utilities, credit cards, the kind of debts that don't feel dramatic until you start counting coins for gas. The thing about desperation is that it changes the shape of ordinary thoughts. At first it was harmless. I handled paperwork all day: delivery receipts, authorizations, invoices. My boss, Mr. Halpern, signed his name dozens of times a week. Same impatient sweep of the pen, same hard downward slash on the H. I must have seen it hundreds of times without thinking about it. Then one afternoon I caught myself staring at it. Not because I wanted to copy it. Because I realized I probably could. That was the beginning. Not the crime itself. Just the moment a line in my head stopped looking permanent. I didn't walk out of the office that day thinking, I'm going to forge a signature. It was uglier than that, quieter. More like a thought I kept pushing away that kept finding its way back. That month had gone bad fast. My landlord taped a final notice to my door. My mother's pharmacy called twice about an unpaid balance. My bank account was so close to zero that I stopped checking it because the number felt personal, almost insulting. I was sleeping badly and snapping at people for no reason. Every ordinary problem started feeling like proof that I was losing control of my life. At work, I was the guy who filed documents nobody read. Invisible. But invisibility teaches you things. You notice who signs what, who approves transfers without reading, who leaves stacks of paperwork unattended because they trust routine more than people. Mr. Halpern trusted routine. That scared me, because once I noticed it, I also noticed opportunity. And once you start seeing a door, part of you starts wondering what's on the other side. I spent the next week pretending I hadn't made up my mind. That was the lie I told myself. In reality, I was already studying everything. I started staying a few minutes late under the excuse of clearing backlog. I watched how paperwork moved through the office, who opened the mail, who logged invoices, which folders sat untouched until Friday. Nobody noticed because people rarely pay attention to the quiet employee who never causes trouble. Halpern's signature was everywhere. Approval slips, courier authorizations, petty cash forms. I began noticing tiny details. The first letter leaned forward harder than the rest. The middle of his name always compressed, like he was bored halfway through writing it. The final stroke dipped low and rose sharply. It looked careless until you stared at it long enough. One evening I took a discarded copy from the recycling bin and folded it into my jacket. I remember how absurdly loud my heartbeat sounded. That was the first physical thing I did, and somehow it felt more criminal than the forgery itself. At home, I turned my kitchen table into a private workshop. Not because I was clever, because I was terrified of making a stupid mistake. I laid out old invoices, blank printer paper, a cheap desk lamp, and 3 black pens from the pharmacy downstairs. I kept telling myself it was only practice, only curiosity, but that stopped sounding convincing after the first hour. I started tracing, then copying freehand, then throwing away sheet after sheet. The first attempts were embarrassing. Too careful. Too slow. They looked like someone trying to imitate confidence instead of actually having it. After a while I understood the trick wasn't precision. It was speed. Halpern never signed neatly because he never had to prove anything. His signature moved like impatience. For 4 nights I practiced until my wrist hurt. I also studied the accounting system. Small reimbursement requests under a certain amount rarely triggered questions. That detail mattered. By then the plan had become frighteningly simple. And simple plans are dangerous, because they start to feel reasonable. The amount I chose was $840. Not because I needed exactly that. Because it sat below the number that usually triggered a second approval. I knew that from months of filing expense forms nobody else bothered to understand. Too small to look ambitious, big enough to buy time. Rent, medication for my mother, groceries, and maybe enough left over so I could stop feeling like every day was a small emergency. I built a story around it. A courier reimbursement for urgent delivery expenses tied to a client account that already had heavy weekly traffic. Real account number, real formatting, real dates. I copied language from older forms so it would sound familiar. That was the strange part. Crime felt less like invention and more like editing. I rehearsed the moment in my head constantly. Walk in. Drop the form into the outgoing stack. Don't hover. Don't look back. By Friday morning I had the paper folded inside my notebook. And suddenly it felt heavier than paper should. Friday morning felt unreal, like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my body. The office looked exactly the same as every other day. Fluorescent lights buzzing, phones ringing, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the break room. That almost made it worse. I kept thinking something dramatic should happen, some obvious sign telling me to stop. Instead, normal life kept moving, which made what I was doing feel strangely invisible. I waited until just after 10. That was when Halpern usually disappeared into calls with vendors and everyone else settled into their own routines. My palms were damp enough that I worried I'd wrinkle the paper. I walked to accounting carrying 3 ordinary folders. The forged form was tucked between them. Elaine from payroll glanced up and said, "Morning, William." Just that. 2 words. My throat tightened so hard I nearly answered twice. I put the stack into the incoming tray, nodded, and kept walking. Then I reached the hallway and realized my legs felt weak enough that I had to stop pretending I wasn't shaking. The worst part wasn't the drop. It was the waiting afterward. For 2 days every sound in the office felt aimed at me. When someone said my name from across the room, my stomach jumped. When Halpern closed his office door, I was sure he'd found the form. I kept replaying tiny details. Whether the ink looked slightly darker, whether Elaine had held the paper too long, whether my hand had trembled enough to leave something visible. Nothing happened Monday. Nothing happened Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon I checked my account during lunch and saw the deposit. $840. For a second I honestly couldn't breathe. My chest tightened so hard I had to sit down on a bench outside the bank. I expected triumph. Relief. Some movie version of victory. Instead it felt electric and sickening at the same time. I withdrew cash immediately, which in hindsight was stupid. Rent first. Pharmacy second. The cashier handed me the receipt, smiled politely and said, "Long day?" I remember thinking, if only you knew. For about 48 hours, I convinced myself it was over. My rent was paid. My mother got her medication. There was food in the refrigerator that hadn't come from the discount shelf. I slept for nearly 10 hours the first night, the kind of heavy sleep that only comes after weeks of panic. That scared me a little, how quickly relief can make something wrong feel practical. Then Thursday afternoon, Elaine stopped by my desk. She didn't look angry. That somehow made it worse. She said accounting was reviewing reimbursement paperwork because a client had questioned a shipping charge. She asked if I remembered handling anything tied to that account. Her voice was casual, almost apologetic. I heard myself say, "Not really. Just the usual filing." My mouth answered before my brain did. She nodded and walked away, but I could feel heat rising up my neck. My ears were ringing. For the rest of the day I couldn't focus on a single number on the screen. That was when fear stopped being abstract and became physical. That night I barely slept. Every sound outside my apartment made me sit upright. A car door slammed around midnight, and I was suddenly convinced someone had come for me. Rationally, I knew that was absurd. Nobody sends police cars over a paperwork discrepancy. But fear doesn't care about proportion. Once it gets inside you, it starts rewriting every ordinary noise. I spent hours trying to remember every detail. Had I touched the form too much? Had anyone seen me near accounting longer than usual? Had I practiced enough, or had the signature looked just a little too deliberate? The worst thought was Elaine. She was careful. She noticed things. Not dramatic things, small ones. The kind that become dangerous later. Around 2 in the morning I actually considered calling in sick and disappearing for a few days. Then I realized that would make me look worse. So I went in the next morning pretending to be normal. That was exhausting. You don't realize how much effort ordinary behavior takes until every word suddenly feels like evidence. Around 11, Halpern asked me to step into his office. I remember noticing ridiculous things on the walk there. The hum of the copier, a coffee stain on the carpet outside his door, the fact that my hands suddenly felt too cold. He didn't tell me to sit. Elaine was there already, holding a thin folder. Halpern asked whether I had processed courier paperwork for the Bennett account last week. My mouth went dry. I said I handled filing sometimes, nothing unusual. Elaine opened the folder and slid the reimbursement form across the desk. Then she pointed to something I hadn't expected. The dates matched, the account number matched, the signature passed. But the courier listed on the form had been on vacation that week. He had posted beach photos online. Accounting only noticed because the client challenged a separate charge. That stupid detail, vacation photos. Halpern looked confused more than angry. Elaine looked directly at me. And in that moment I understood the terrifying difference between suspicion and proof. We were standing exactly in between. I wish I could say I confessed immediately. I didn't. I tried to talk my way through it. I said maybe the paperwork had been copied from an earlier delivery, maybe someone reused an old form, maybe accounting had mixed dates during filing. The excuses came out fast, almost automatic. That frightened me more than the accusation. Apparently I had become the kind of person who could lie while looking directly at people. Halpern kept frowning at the paper. Elaine kept watching me. Then she said something quiet that cut straight through me. "William, you're shaking." And I was. My hands were trembling hard enough that I tucked them under the desk. I could feel sweat down my back even though the office was cold. Nobody raised their voice. That made it unbearable. Halpern said he wanted me to go home for the day while they reviewed records. I nodded, stood up too quickly, and nearly knocked the chair over. The hallway outside felt longer than I had ever remembered it. I spent that afternoon walking around the city because going home felt impossible. Every cafe window looked like somewhere I didn't belong. I bought coffee, forgot to drink it, and kept circling the same 3 blocks. My phone stayed in my hand the whole time. Every vibration made my heart jump. I kept expecting a call from Halpern, or worse, someone official asking me where I was. Around 4 my mother called. She wanted to thank me for paying the pharmacy bill. She sounded lighter than she had in weeks. She said, "I don't know how you managed it, but I'm grateful." That sentence landed harder than anything in the office. I told her work had been busy and got off the phone as quickly as I could. Then I stood there on a crowded sidewalk feeling completely alone. That was when the story I'd been telling myself finally collapsed. I hadn't done this because I was clever, or trapped, or unlucky. I had done it because, at some point, I decided fear mattered more than honesty. The call came the next morning. Halpern asked me to come in early, before the rest of the staff arrived. The office felt different when it was nearly empty, too quiet, too sharp. He was sitting with Elaine and a printed copy of transaction records. Nobody tried to soften anything. They had reviewed access logs, filing times, and camera footage from the hallway outside accounting. The camera didn't show the paper itself, but it showed me entering with 3 folders and leaving less than 10 seconds later. Then they matched that with the reimbursement timestamp. It wasn't courtroom proof. It was enough. I could feel the last part of my resistance draining away. So I told the truth. Not all at once. It came out in fragments: money problems, my mother, the practice sheets, the form, the deposit. I kept expecting anger. Instead, Halpern just looked older. Elaine closed the folder. Then Halpern said, "You should have asked for help." That sentence still follows me more than being caught ever did. I wasn't arrested. That still surprises people when I tell this story. Halpern gave me a choice: repay every dollar immediately, resign quietly, and they would keep it internal unless something else surfaced. He said the company didn't want police reports, lawyers, or public drama over $840. They wanted the problem removed. I borrowed money from my uncle and paid it back within 3 days. Then I packed my desk into a cardboard box. That walk out of the building was worse than I expected. Not dramatic. Nobody shouted. A couple of people glanced up, then back at their screens. Ordinary office sounds kept going: keyboards, phones, printers. That normality hurt more than humiliation. It meant the place continued perfectly well without me. For months afterward I jumped whenever unknown numbers called my phone. I kept waiting for consequences that never fully arrived. But something had changed in a way I couldn't explain. I had crossed a line once, and now I knew I was capable of doing it. It's been 12 years. I never forged another signature. Never stole from another employer. I built my life back slowly. Different job, smaller ambitions, better habits, fewer lies. From the outside, it probably looks like a minor story. $840. No police. No trial. No headlines. But that's not how it lives inside me. The real damage wasn't losing the job. It was discovering how ordinary I felt while moving towards something dishonest. I used to think people crossed lines because they were reckless, greedy, or cruel. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they just get tired, scared, and start calling desperation logic. That's the part one want people to understand. If you're cornered, talk to someone before silence starts making decisions for you. Ask for help earlier than your pride wants you to. Debt can be repaired. Embarrassment passes. But once you teach yourself that fear justifies betrayal, that lesson stays with you. And trust me, living with yourself afterward is the hardest sentence.